We now move on to verse 10 of 1 John chapter 1. John writes, "If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us." So, if even though God has been faithful to us and offered forgiveness to us, and we continue to say that we do not sin, we make God out to be a liar. If we go back to the 8th verse, in the 8th verse we were shown to deceive ourselves if we say we have no sin. Now, in a far stronger statement, verse 10, John says, we make God out to be a liar if we say we have no sin. In the 8th verse, we were told that if we continue to say we have no sin, then the truth is not in us. Now, in the 10th verse, we are told in a far stronger statement, his word is not in us. And so these two verses, verses 8 and 10, they pivot around verse 9, which is, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so there we have been given a great assurance that when we open up our hearts to God in confession, that he's going to treat us fairly by being faithful and just towards us. And so then for us to say that we don't need to confess because we have no sin, that we can live our lives without this confession, then we are deluded and deceiving ourselves. And rather than living in the truth, we are living a lie and saying to God, you're a liar. Because if at any moment we decide not to trust him, to confess to him, to have fellowship with him, then what does this mean we are saying to God about himself? What we're doing is we're throwing his faithfulness and his justice and his fellowship, all these things that he has given to us and being to us. He's being faithful towards us. He's being just towards us. He's having fellowship with us. His very character and his very nature, where he is giving us so much, well, we're just throwing that right back in his face. If we refuse to trust God, giving in to the lie, not believing his promises, not wanting to walk with him in the light as he is in the light, then we're walking a very dangerous line. And the question we've got to ask ourselves, well, why would we even want to do this? Why would we want to go back to hiding in the darkness of our sins, trying to cover up our faults and failings, when we could have the unspeakable joy of coming out into the light of God, casting ourselves onto his grace and mercy, being held in the arms of the one who deals with us faithfully and justly, and the one who forgives us our sins, so that we are made righteous before him. Why would you want to do that? For us not to do that would be completely foolish, as well as the more serious matter of making God out to be a liar. How can there be fellowship between God and ourselves if we decide for ourselves that we do not need his forgiveness because we foolishly hide our sin from him and say that sin is not in us? As we've seen in the previous verses, the way that we have fellowship with God is by walking in the light of God as he is in the light. And a condition of this walking in the light is that we confess our sins. The two cannot be separated. If we are walking in the light, this means we are confessing our sins. We're confessing our sins, it means we're walking in the light. Remember how we saw that as we walked in the light more and more, we would come to know the mind of God more and more, his ways, his dealings, his reasonings. we would have a greater wisdom as we came closer to him? Well, as we walk in the light, we must be continually learning to see more clearly as he sees. How we see must become more and more how he sees. To have his insight at an ever deeper level. That we see in our eyes what he sees in his. How we see ourselves, our works and our ways are more and more seen by us as they are seen by God. And this feeds into Paul when the closer he comes to God, the greater he sees his sin. Because he realizes how holy God is. And so Paul cries out to God for even more, that he may be forgiven, confessing his sins more and more. So how can this be? Well, that's one of the questions we might ask ourselves. How is this to be, to have this greater insight of God at an ever deeper level, and to see in our eyes what he sees in us? Well, how can this be? I'm just a simple human being. Well, as we continue to look to verse 10, then John will tell us. And so we find out tomorrow. But up until then, take care and God bless.